What the Philippines deemed an outpost for its territorial sovereignty turned into a perilous flashpoint in disputed waters of the South China Sea. Tonight we're joined by Dr. Orlando Mercado, live from Manila. He was the Philippine Secretary of Defense in 1999 when the BRP Sierra Madre was run aground in the Second Thomas Shoal. Dr. Mercado, today we're hearing the Foreign Secretary having to speak to our correspondent and defend his decision to reach a verbal agreement with China on resupplying those troops in the Sierra Madre. And they need to resupply them because otherwise they have no other recourse to even basic necessities. And when you agreed or decided to let the Navy run the ship aground in 1999, did you foresee the kinds of problems that might have created in terms of transparency, regularity in agreements and legislation?
Well, actually, during those days, in 1999, actually 1995, the Chinese already started their creeping invasion. And what they did is, in Mischief Reef, they were putting up structures. At the beginning, they were saying, oh, these are shelters for our fisher folk. And later on, we found out that they were cement structures and it had military significance already. So what we needed to do was to assure ourselves that we are able to have a presence. And that presence was very important. So I challenged the said, come up with something that we can do with our resources, short of getting into an active kinetic experience. So what happened was that the flag officer in command of the highest Navy Admiral, Vice Admiral Eduardo Maria Santos, said, sir, we have LSTs, landing ship tanks. And what we can do is to maintain our presence because we are being denied access, is that we can beach it. And these particular vessels are part of our own active vessels. They belong to the Philippine government. And that means that no matter what the age is or in condition of the particular ship is, it represents the Philippines wherever they are.
All right, so, Dr. Mercado, pardon me for cutting in.
The idea was innovative.
If I could just clarify. So Mischief Reef, 1994, China essentially took that over, and it did that, as you say, via a creeping invasion. It installed structures that it said were for its fisher folk. Instead, they turned out to be, well, military installations. So the Philippines...
Then later on, now it's military installations.
Fearing that this would happen as well in the Second Thomas Shoal, thought they would preempt that, forestall that by ramming the ship aground at a time when Philippine naval and, I suppose, military might, even at that point, could not compare with China's. This asymmetry, it's even greater now, and we're 25 years on since the grounding of that ship. Surely you might have expected in the last few decades that something might have been done, so we are not left with a desperate situation of having to send food and water and basic building equipment to essentially a dilapidated wreck.
No, it's very important for us to have a presence there. It's about being there. And we have to remember that the Chinese strategy is not very inscrutable, but what is needed is for us to understand, and I would like to use the words of Dr. Ashley Tellis of the Carnegie Endowment when he said that China's 9-dash line is fundamentally ambiguous, but the potential for enforcing those claims is not. There is a purposeful attempt to exploit ambiguity and subtlety in the service of very ambitious geopolitical goals. The 9-dash line, characterized by its ambiguity, is intended to insinuate maximum claims, and that is the main reason why China has avoided negotiations. It has avoided regional and multilateral negotiations and arbitration, and if it feels it's actually buying time, for them this is a long game. And
But
the issue
if the
has to
Philippines was
be
seeking,
attacked in that way.
pardon me, Dr. Mercado, if it was seeking clarity, what it got from the ruling in 2016 by the PCA under UNCLOS, that was unequivocal and unambivalent, and it was absolutely clear, and it's legally binding as well. On 15 points, it ruled in favor of the Philippines. And yet, even then, you are unable to extract, and China signs up to UNCLOS. There's no, as far as you can see, any clear return on action from Beijing as far as adhering to that arbitration from by the PCA under UNCLOS. So what more could you want in terms of legal clarity?
Well, we have international law on our side, but China just completely disregards this. And what it is doing now is that, as it is, it's like squeezing the sponge and then letting it go a little bit and squeezing it again. So this actually is part and parcel of their strategy. The attempt actually is very obvious that China is buying time, and for them, it is important that first, China wants to prevent the conclusive but adverse resolution of these claims. And this is until the Chinese nation reaches a power, a level of maturity, and they can enforce currently what is vague but relatively maximalist claims.
So on the Philippines side, we've seen President Ferdinand Marcos engage in a transparency initiative, essentially naming and shaming where possible, engaging on legal routes. You saw him just Friday last week signing 2 new laws to reaffirm Philippine claims to territory in the South China Sea. It has reached out not just to ASEAN, but beyond that to middle-sized powers, signing an RAA with Japan. It's got a VFA with the US as well as Australia, looking for one with France. All these things, is that sufficient to make sure, I don't know, to put the Philippines firmly on the map in terms of being a legitimate middle-sized power with claims that must be recognized?
Well, we have to understand that China seeks to avoid premature conflict with any major maritime power that might undermine their interests. And they're also afraid to force a resolution of the crisis in ways that would undermine their long-term objectives. So it wants to expand the privileges by, as I mentioned, a creeping invasion, but it also wants to avoid, above all else, a showdown with any major maritime power in the sense, because this would force a resolution of the problem, and it will not be to their long-term goals. They want to avoid premature enhanced military presence of what they call outsiders, and they say they fear that this might reinforce the claims of smaller neighbors like us and Vietnam and all others that are complaining about what China is doing in the South China Sea.
Dr. Mercado, I think you've always recommended the need, when confronted with a very strong rival, to be creative in your solutions, to even in strength to find weakness, and in your own weakness to also find strength. So what you have just pointed out might in fact be a weakness, the fact that a greater power fears actual confrontation, even though it might very likely win in that confrontation. What might the Philippines do recognizing that relative fragility in a larger power?
Well, in a situation where you are not, you're being bullied and you are physically incapable of fighting the big bully, you can have friends and allies. And in that particular case, I think this is where it is obvious that our direction, as far as South China Sea is concerned, we are not traveling alone. We are not a lone wolf, but we're traveling in a pack. And we have been able to get cooperation and exercise. Other countries are joining us in the exercises that we are conducting in the South China Sea. And this means that there is a way to beef up our position by way of showing the world that there are others who believe in the consistency of our laws and respect for an order that respects international decisions and international law.
Oh, thanks, that Dr. Orlando Mercado, former Philippine Defense Secretary and also Senator, live there from Manila.